Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. ID.AM-01 tracking organizational hardware assets. ID.AM-01 ensures that organizations identify, track, and manage all hardware assets within their infrastructure to maintain visibility, enforce security policies, and mitigate cybersecurity risks associated with unmanaged or unauthorized devices. This subcategory belongs to the Identify function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, version 2.0, emphasizing that effective asset management is foundational to cybersecurity resilience, enabling organizations to detect vulnerabilities, prevent unauthorized access, and enforce security controls across their technology environments. Without structured hardware asset tracking, organizations risk exposure to shadow IT, security misconfigurations, and increased attack surfaces due to unmanaged or obsolete devices. By tracking organizational hardware assets, businesses ensure that every device within their network is accounted for, regularly assessed for security risks, and maintained in alignment with cybersecurity policies. A structured approach to asset tracking enables organizations to detect unauthorized devices, prevent outdated hardware from becoming security liabilities, and ensure that security patches and configurations are applied consistently across all endpoints. Organizations that implement real-time asset discovery tools, enforce structured asset inventory policies, and integrate hardware asset tracking into cybersecurity governance improve their ability to protect sensitive data, reduce operational risks, and enhance regulatory compliance efforts. Multiple stakeholders play a role in tracking organizational hardware assets. Cybersecurity and IT operations teams are responsible for maintaining hardware inventories, detecting unauthorized devices, and enforcing asset security policies. Procurement and asset management teams ensure that hardware lifecycle tracking is documented, preventing unauthorized or outdated devices from remaining within the network. Compliance and risk management officers ensure that hardware tracking aligns with regulatory cybersecurity frameworks, legal data protection requirements, and enterprise security governance models. Hardware asset tracking is implemented through structured asset management policies, real-time device discovery tools, and continuous security compliance verification mechanisms. This includes deploying automated asset monitoring platforms, enforcing structured hardware registration procedures, and ensuring that asset tracking data is integrated with cybersecurity response and risk management systems. Organizations that fail to track hardware assets effectively risk having unknown or rogue devices within their networks, facing compliance violations due to unmanaged endpoints, and being vulnerable to cyber threats exploiting unmonitored hardware. Several key terms define hardware asset tracking and its role in cybersecurity governance. Asset discovery and inventory management ensures that organizations maintain an up-to-date record of all devices connected to enterprise networks. Endpoint security and device hardening requires organizations to enforce security configurations on all tracked hardware assets, reducing exposure to cyber threats. Unauthorized device detection enables organizations to identify and isolate unapproved hardware before it becomes a security risk. Regulatory compliance for asset tracking mandates that organizations align hardware inventory management with legal cybersecurity obligations, ensuring visibility into all network devices. Lifecycle management and decommissioning ensures that organizations properly track hardware from procurement to disposal, preventing outdated devices from becoming security liability. Challenges in tracking organizational hardware assets often lead to incomplete asset inventories, weak enforcement of hardware security policies, and failure to integrate asset tracking into broader cybersecurity risk management frameworks. One common issue is lack of real-time visibility into hardware assets, where organizations fail to continuously monitor device activity, leading to blind spots in security enforcement. Another issue is failure to track hardware beyond initial procurement, where organizations lack structured processes for updating asset inventories as devices are moved, upgraded, or decommissioned. Some organizations mistakenly believe that hardware tracking is only necessary for critical infrastructure, without recognizing that even low-priority devices can introduce cybersecurity risks if they are not properly managed. When organizations implement structured hardware asset tracking, they enhance cybersecurity resilience, improve device security compliance, and ensure that all organizational assets remain protected against cyber threats. A structured hardware asset management framework ensures that endpoint security remains enforced, asset visibility remains comprehensive, and cybersecurity risk mitigation strategies remain aligned with enterprise governance requirements. Organizations that implement structured hardware tracking policies, enforce automated asset discovery mechanisms, and integrate asset monitoring into enterprise security strategies develop a comprehensive cybersecurity framework that strengthens device security resilience and reduces asset management risks proactively. Organizations that fail to track hardware assets effectively face significant cybersecurity, operational, and compliance risks. Without structured asset management, businesses risk allowing unauthorized or outdated devices to remain on the network, increasing exposure to cyber threats such as malware infections, data breaches, and insider threats. A common issue is failure to enforce real-time asset discovery, where organizations only track hardware at the time of procurement but lack continuous monitoring, leaving unregistered devices undetected. Another major challenge is lack of integration between asset tracking and cybersecurity governance, where organizations maintain a hardware inventory but fail to align it with security policies, leaving gaps in risk management. By implementing structured asset tracking, organizations ensure that all hardware devices remain accounted for, actively monitored, and aligned with security controls. A well-defined hardware asset management framework improves security visibility, reduces the risk of unauthorized devices, and ensures compliance with cybersecurity regulations. Organizations that deploy real-time hardware tracking tools, enforce strict device registration policies, and integrate asset monitoring with endpoint security management improve their ability to detect and mitigate cybersecurity risks originating from unmanaged devices. At the partial tier, organizations lack structured hardware asset tracking mechanisms, leading to inconsistent device inventory records, unmonitored hardware deployments, and weak enforcement of security controls across unmanaged endpoints. Asset management is handled reactively, with organizations only addressing hardware security risks after a security breach or operational failure occurs. A small business at this level may allow employees to connect personal devices to the corporate network without tracking them, increasing the risk of unauthorized data access and malware infections. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to develop structured hardware asset tracking policies, ensuring that new devices are logged and monitored at the time of deployment. However, asset management efforts may still be limited, with inconsistent enforcement of asset tracking policies across different device types. A mid-sized financial institution at this level may require all corporate laptops and servers to be registered in an asset management database, but fail to track peripheral devices such as external storage drives and personal mobile devices, creating security gaps. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured asset tracking framework, ensuring that all hardware devices are continuously monitored, security policies are applied consistently, and asset inventories remain aligned with enterprise risk management strategies. Hardware security governance is formalized, with leadership actively involved in reviewing asset tracking policies and ensuring that cybersecurity controls remain in force across all organizational devices. A healthcare provider at this stage may require all medical devices, endpoint workstations, and third-party vendor equipment to be integrated into a centralized asset tracking system, ensuring compliance with health data protection regulations. At the adaptive tier, organizations employ AI-driven hardware tracking solutions, predictive cybersecurity risk assessment tools, and automated asset compliance enforcement mechanisms to dynamically monitor hardware assets, detect unauthorized devices, and enforce security controls in real time. Hardware asset security management is fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that asset tracking, endpoint security, and risk mitigation strategies remain continuously optimized. A global technology firm at this level may use AI-powered hardware analytics to assess device vulnerabilities, enforce automated risk-based access controls, and dynamically adjust asset tracking policies based on evolving cybersecurity threats. Tracking organizational hardware assets aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Special Publication 800-53, ensuring that organizations implement structured hardware security tracking frameworks and dynamic asset compliance verification models. One key control is CM-8, System Component Inventory, which requires organizations to maintain an accurate and up-to-date inventory of all hardware assets, ensuring that all devices are monitored and managed securely. A multinational logistics company implementing this control may deploy automated asset discovery tools that scan enterprise networks in real time, identifying all connected devices and ensuring compliance with security policies. Another key control is AC-6, Least Privilege, which mandates that organizations restrict device access based on security requirements, ensuring that unauthorized hardware cannot connect to enterprise systems or access sensitive data. A financial institution implementing this control may use endpoint access control policies to ensure that only company-registered devices are allowed to connect to internal networks, preventing unauthorized personal or rogue devices from accessing critical financial systems. Tracking organizational hardware assets also aligns with SC-18 Mobile Code, which requires organizations to enforce security policies that prevent unauthorized hardware from running unapproved software or executing malicious code on enterprise networks. This control ensures that organizations maintain oversight of all connected devices, preventing security breaches caused by unauthorized hardware components. A global defense contractor implementing this control may use endpoint security solutions to restrict unapproved devices from executing scripts or unauthorized applications that could introduce vulnerabilities into classified systems. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic hardware asset tracking policies, ensuring that all company-owned computers and mobile devices are logged in a spreadsheet and manually updated as needed. A large enterprise may deploy AI-driven hardware asset tracking platforms, automated endpoint monitoring solutions, and real-time device compliance verification tools to ensure that hardware asset management remains continuously optimized. Organizations in highly regulated industries, such as finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure, may require continuous third-party audits of hardware asset tracking, legally mandated inventory reporting, and integration with cybersecurity frameworks such as zero-trust architecture to ensure strict control over device access and security compliance. Auditors assess hardware asset tracking by reviewing whether organizations have structured, documented, and continuously enforced asset management frameworks. They evaluate whether organizations implement structured hardware inventory management models, enforce real-time device monitoring policies, and integrate asset tracking into broader enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies. If an organization fails to track hardware assets effectively, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in device security management, weak asset inventory enforcement, and failure to align asset tracking with enterprise cybersecurity risk management strategies. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Hardware asset inventory reports and structured device tracking documentation demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce structured asset tracking governance models. Endpoint security compliance tracking records and device security audit reports provide insights into whether organizations proactively monitor hardware asset security performance, and refine device tracking policies based on real-time cybersecurity risk intelligence. Incident response evaluations related to hardware security failures and third-party asset risk mitigation reports show whether organizations effectively track vendor hardware security risks, ensuring that supplier device management remains continuously enforced. A compliance success scenario could involve a global cloud computing provider that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that hardware asset tracking processes are fully integrated into IT operations, ensuring that all organizational devices are continuously monitored, third-party hardware security compliance frameworks are actively enforced, and asset tracking security governance remains aligned with regulatory cybersecurity risk management standards. Auditors confirm that device security risks are systematically managed, hardware asset compliance is continuously enforced, and asset tracking governance aligns with enterprise cybersecurity risk mitigation strategies. In contrast, an organization that fails to implement structured hardware asset tracking frameworks, neglects device security compliance verification, or lacks formalized hardware inventory management oversight models may receive audit findings for poor hardware risk management, weak third-party cybersecurity asset tracking enforcement, and failure to integrate device security risk assessments into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that hardware asset tracking remains continuous and effective. One major challenge is lack of automation in asset tracking, where organizations fail to implement real-time hardware monitoring tools, leading to delayed detection of rogue or unauthorized devices. Another challenge is failure to align asset tracking policies with cybersecurity compliance requirements, where organizations lack predefined third-party hardware security verification measures, increasing exposure to compliance violations and regulatory fines. A final challenge is over-reliance on manual asset inventory management, where organizations use outdated tracking methods instead of deploying automated device compliance enforcement mechanisms, leading to potential oversights in hardware security risk management. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured asset tracking frameworks, ensuring that device security compliance tracking remains continuously enforced, and integrating asset monitoring into enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance strategies. Investing in automated hardware inventory compliance monitoring platforms, predictive asset security risk assessment models, and AI-driven device security tracking tools ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine hardware asset tracking strategies in real time. Standardizing hardware security governance methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that asset security policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to hardware-based cyber threats and strengthening enterprise-wide security resilience. By embedding hardware asset tracking into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies, organizations enhance device security, accountability, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable asset risk management strategies across evolving cybersecurity landscapes. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.